Happy Ekadashi to everyone out there. Thank you so much again for coming and spending some time with us to hear about and to relish all the ways in which Srila Prabhupada exemplifies the perfect gentleman through the 26 qualities of a devotee. So again, I'm very, very happy to be with my friend Siddhanta Prabhu, who has given so much of his life to bringing these qualities to us through the memories, through the lens, through the eyes of us, his disciples, who had the fortune of being with him in different times and places. So, Siddhanta, today I believe we are going to be hearing about the quality of not eating more than is required.
Right. Quality, right? The quality number 17,
17.
A perfect gentleman or a Vaishnava does not eat more than required. Now, usually what comes to mind when we hear this quality, that we think that this applies only to the quantity that a devotee or Vaishnava eats. But today we'll explore some other factors, some other facets, like the type of prashadam, type of food that we eat or the devotee eats, the circumstances in which we find ourselves eating prashadam. And this will be explored by, of course, again, listening to Prabhupada's disciples who were with him during these times. We have about half and half men and women that will share their stories and personal experiences with Prabhupada. So today we will hear from Jamuna Devi Dasi.
Jamuna. Must hear from Jamuna.
Exactly.
On this topic.
Shruti Rupa Devi Dasi, who was Prabhupada's cook for several years. Jai Pataka Swami, Tamal Krishna Goswami, Rebhatinandan, and Sarva Mangala Devi Dasi.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
So let's jump right into it. And first, let's hear from Jamuna, who is one of the leaders, if not the leader, when it comes to cooking prashadam, as instructed by Srila Prabhupada. And in this particular story, she will give us an example of the amount of prashadam that Srila Prabhupada ate at one point, and more importantly, the type of prashadam required to capture us and turn us into bhaktas. Very essential. So let's hear from Jamuna Devi Dasi.
Srila Prabhupada liked anything that was well prepared. He tried to teach us technique, procedure, quality, cleanliness, purity, in simple ways. He didn't teach with a lot of words, he taught by example. And of course, he had personal favorites. At this time, Srila Prabhupada was had a little tummy, and he was eating immense quantities of rice. Sometimes we would feed a very large thali, and he would finish off most of that thali, leave a little maha for us. But the things that he taught us were generally fatty and juicy and sweet and succulent and very sumptuous. That was the era of sumptuous prasad, because he felt if he could catch us through the tongue doing two things, vibrating and respecting, if he could capture us through those two ways, then we would begin to taste more and more of Krishna consciousness. So the food was sumptuous and rich.
Yeah, we were just reflecting, required, the term required for what? So here the requirement is to get us to become attached to Krishna.
Yeah, and
through prashadam.
Always concerned that the quality of the prashadam was first class.
Yes.
Many instances where Prabhupada always asked, even if he couldn't eat, if he was sick at one time, he would ask, how are the devotees eating?
Yeah.
What are they eating?
Yeah.
And sometimes he would chastise the cook actually forced the devotees to throw a cook out in India.
Oh, yeah.
That's another story. But yeah, so that's the prime benefit and motivation and reason for good prashadam, to make devotees and keep devotees.
Yes.
So now let's listen to Shruti Rupa Devi Dasi, who cooked, as I said, for Prabhupada for several years there towards the end. And she will give us an example of what was required for Srila Prabhupada at a time when his health was not at an optimum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the cooking early on, she was cooking, she used a lot of, so she wasn't using the mustard oil, but she would use a lot of mustard seeds and grind them to a paste, and that would bring out a flavor of mustard. So after maybe 2 weeks of this, Prabhupada he started swelling. He was complaining to me, don't let her make this, don't let her make that. And then I was trying to taper her off. Bhishma, you can't do this, Bhishma, you can't. And so then about the third day, because at least if she didn't grind them, she started putting, they were floating on everything. And the third day Prabhupada he looked at me and said, do not let her in the kitchen. Do not let her back in the kitchen. And I did not have the heart to tell her she couldn't come in the kitchen. I loved her dearly. And she adored Prabhupada. And so next morning when it was time to come in, there was Bhishma, and we came in, we'd sit down in a little circle. It was like a little ritual. We would begin, and a lot of it was eyes, body language, and feelings in the few little words that I would do. And she'd have her foot knife, and we'd begin, and she had a stone. We had to grind everything. Prabhupada wanted everything fresh. I would take an extra hour and a half in the morning and grind cumin, but at that time he was taking wet paste. It wasn't dry. I would grind with water, and I'd grind on the stone, silbata. And so I'd have all my katoris of ginger paste, chili paste, black pepper paste, and cumin, and right on down the line, mustard seeds, posta. And so we were grinding, and Bhishma was getting her vegetables together, and she asked me for the sarson. In Bengali, it's mustard seeds. And I looked and I said, Bhishma, Prabhupada bolo ne sarson. And she'd look at me, and I'd say, and she had these big cow eyes, and she'd look at me, and I could hardly resist her. And so I went into my katori, and I took one seed, and I looked and I said, Bhishma, bus. And she looked at me. She couldn't believe I was being so cruel. But she took that, we started laughing, she was smiling. She took that one seed and threw a little water and began to grind. And if you know what the stone looks like, it has pits, to grind. So I don't know where she got, and she was going like this, and she got it, and we were laughing. And somewhere or other she got something that she could put in there.
That is a real Leela. Bhishima's cooking. There, you could do a whole series on Bhishima's cooking for Srila Prabhupada, and the different times and situations where sometimes it was no one could understand. They had that relationship. Yeah.
But at that time, mustard seeds were not required, so Prabhupada could not eat more than that one seed.
One seed. But she required it. She
was attached to cooking that way. Samosas, kachoris for Prabhupada.
For service.
Right, out of love. Now let us listen to a unique story by Jayapataka Swami. How Srila Prabhupada explained what is required to eat if the need to drink water arises immediately after a meal.
Okay.
So this will fall into that category of not eating more than required. Prabhupada will give us a scientific method that we can take to heart and learn for ourselves.
Sometimes I'd had the good fortune to ride with Srila Prabhupada from Calcutta, and sometimes I'd be here in my Emperor waiting for him to come. So on one occasion, there was a whole caravan of cars, and we were going out from Calcutta, and there's a little place, a little mango orchard, Used to be a big mango orchard, but what's left of it now is still there. A little piece was purchased by a devotee. And that was always Srila Prabhupada's favorite picnic spot. Every time he would stop there and have his breakfast, leave early in the morning, stop and have a breakfast picnic. So on the way driving out, there was an interesting pastime that Prabhupada had the Krishna and Balaram on the windshield of the car. And so he asked the devotees, well, who is more powerful, Krishna or Balaram? And then some said, well, Balaram, he's the more powerful, he's the older brother. And then some were saying Krishna. And then Prabhupada said, well, see, Balaram has his hand on Krishna's shoulder, so Krishna's holding up Balaram. So he's more powerful. And then we got to the mango orchard. And this time, one of Prabhupada's godbrothers, Damodar Maharaj, he was coming with us. So then Prabhupada had some mats set up, and he had a little portable table, and he was taking prasadam with Damodar Maharaj. He said the others could take also. We were a little off the grass mat, kind of in a distance around. And then sometimes Prabhupada would have that type of let everybody take with them picnic, so it was a little picnic in the garden. And I just remember one little thing is that after taking the fruit, he had some fruit, he gave Damodar Maharaj some fruit. Then he asked that he can serve Damodar Maharaj water. But Damodar Maharaj said, no, but after fruit we shouldn't drink water. And then Prabhupada said, no, but what you can do, the secret is you take a sweet. You take a sweet, then after sweet you must take water. And it doesn't, because if you just take water after fruit, it washes all the nutrition of the fruit out. But if you take a sweet, he said, then that somehow caps it, and you can take water after that, and your fruit nutrition won't be washed away. So something to remember when you get thirsty after taking fruit. Just take a nice Mahaprasad Sandesh or Rasagula. Remember Srila Prabhupada and chant Hare Krishna.
And then drink water.
And then drink a little water, yeah.
So that approach to eating, very scientific. What do you eat first? So it's not eating just to please the tongue, but eating what's required and in a way that keeps you healthy. And nice.
Right. I think Prabhupada would also eat ginger root with every meal, or most meals. So these are different things that he's taught us, and we can share with each other. Now let's hear from Tamal Krishna Goswami about an incident that he had with Srila Prabhupada and a feast that Prabhupada cooked for his spiritual master regarding not eating more than required or at all. So let's listen to Tamal Krishna.
Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur's, I think it was appearance day. So I told Prabhupada that, Srila Prabhupada, can we celebrate this in the evening? Because then we'll have a lot of guests. Prabhupada said, no, it must be celebrated at noon. So it was on a Friday. I said, Friday evening, we can fill up the temple. He said, no, it must be at noon. So we celebrated it in the room, in Prabhupada's room. Prabhupada had a little room. This is La Cienega Boulevard Temple, LA. Prabhupada had a side room next to the big temple room. So Prabhupada did all of the prayers and spoke about his Guru Maharaj. Then he said to me, how is the feast going? So I said, I'll take a look. It was about 10:30. So I went in. Nothing was done. There was no preparation. So I went back and I said, what is going on here? I started screaming at them. They said, well, you told us it was going to be Friday night. I said, Prabhupada wanted it at noon, and maybe it was my mistake. I might not have conveyed the message in any case. So I went back to Prabhupada and he said, so, how is it going? And I said, there's nothing done. Prabhupada just looked at me. Didn't say a word. Got up, walked out of his room, through the temple, through the prasadam hall, and into the kitchen. he immediately told the devotees, get this done, cut this vegetable, this. He cooked a feast in 1 hour for at least 70 devotees. Personally cooked the whole feast, at least 12 preparations, within 1 hour's time. And he always told me, I always remember this, Prabhupada always said, deity worship is 1 hour's business, cooking is 1 hour's business. Cooked the whole feast in 1 hour. And I remember one of the best things I remember about it was the way Prabhupada made the puris that day. Because every puri puffed up. He put in the puri in the hot ghee, you know, and he would just touch it. And it was like he would touch them. I remember they would blow a little and he would touch them, even sometimes with his finger. They're just perfect puris. Then the feast was offered, and it was brought out of Prabhupada's room after. It was given to Prabhupada, the whole Maha plate. Within about 3 minutes afterwards, it came out practically untouched. And we were all eating this big feast, and we saw Prabhupada didn't eat it. Prabhupada was very upset. But he still cooked the whole feast for his Guru Maharaj. He was determined that it must be, and he told me it must be offered by 12. But he was very disturbed.
Yeah, boy. The mood of the role of food as an offering, and the honoring of that food also as an offering, and you know, that's I think the essence of this quality of a Vaishnava.
Yeah, it also reminds me of, Prabhupada mentioned, I think we spoke about this before, how when the digestive juices in the stomach call out and urge you to eat, you get hungry, then you need to satisfy that right away. But in this case, it's kind of like the opposite, where his consciousness and his mental state was disturbed by not having the devotees prepare properly, where he had to take over, you know, and do it all himself. I'm sure he you know, obviously did it out of love, but that's not what his initial intention was.
Yes. Yeah.
And because of that, and I'm speculating maybe, but with that mental disturbance, he, you know, he was not required. It was not required for him to eat.
Yeah, not required. Yeah.
It would have, you know, upset him even more, maybe physically, if he ate at that time.
Mm.
So Ray Bhaktinandan tells another story. All these devotees had a lot of personal association with Prabhupada, so we take advantage of their stories. And this particular story he tells, he explains what Srila Prabhupada told him about eating offered foodstuff to Krishna and this requirement about offering.
Yes. Okay.
So let's listen to Ray Bhaktinandan.
While we were walking back one time, I remember I asked Srila Prabhupada, and we were walking side by side, I said, Srila Prabhupada, could I ask you this? This is not a judgmental question, because whatever you eat, I'll eat with you and feel like it's what I should be eating, and it's Mahaprasadam for me. But I don't think that the food that we're getting fed here is really being offered to Krishna. They have a Krishna deity in there, but you can't tell him from the other deities, and they don't make any discrimination. And how should we view eating like this? And Prabhupada looked at me and he said, now I'm putting this out now because I feel like some of these things, at least they should be on record, even though, well, I'll tell you what happened. He said, actually, he said, everything is prasadam. And so a Vaishnava, if he takes anything, he simply takes it as the mercy of the Lord, right? But we prefer to eat what is offered to Radha and Krishna. But otherwise, we understand everything to be the mercy of Krishna. He said, but do not preach like this, he said. And I said, why is that? And he said, because the new devotees, they will take food simply as sense enjoyment unless they offer it first. And so we do not want to confuse them. And that, as I thought about it, I was smiling on the way back, because I always thought that's the difference between how an Uttama Adhikari sees things and when he comes down to the level of a Madhyama Adhikari to preach. It was the first time I saw a clear-cut example of that, which I saw many times later on, as I saw how Prabhupada had his priorities and like that. But that was the first time.
That is quite a significant demonstration of Srila Prabhupada's relationship with food. All food to him was Krishna's prashadam.
Right. So it's compassionate and a clear understanding of the philosophy. and
Yeah.
that distinction between Uttama and Madhyamadikari, and the way, we're there for preach. So Prabhupada was giving the absolute truth to him, but, qualified that by saying, don't preach this when I'm just telling you.
Yeah, certainly new to people like me who was, oh yeah, okay.
This is the absolute standard.
Let's go for it.
Yeah. But qualified it so that the younger,
Yeah.
new devotees would not be confused and
Yeah.
neglect to offer with love and devotion.
Yes.
We have Shruti Rupa, who had this a good deal of experience with Prabhupada. Will again tell us an anecdote that she experienced where she describes what Srila Prabhupada required when his body was failing him. And so this falls in that platform of what's required in that circumstance.
And at that time, Prabhupada hadn't come out to Darshan. I hadn't seen Prabhupada in 2 weeks physically, and he hadn't eaten anything that you could count in the palm of your hand in that amount of time. And when I walked in, it was a bit of a shock. He didn't have his kurta on. He had a top piece, and he was sitting, and he had his knee up, and he was dhoti over his knee, so his knee was showing. And his collarbone was jutting out. He was so thin. And it immediately put me in a space when I saw him. And I went up, but I couldn't hear his voice. His voice was very weak. So I moved a little closer. Couldn't hear him. I had to come maybe 5 inches from his face to hear his voice. And I was right into his face. And he looked at me and he said, I have not eaten anything solid for 2 weeks. And I started to cry. The tears started to come down my face. And he saw that and he looked at me and he said, but I'm eating this Singara. And everybody roared. There was Tamal Krishna Maharaj, there was Bhakti Charu, and Upendra. Upendra was there. And everybody roared and said, Jai Prabhupada. And so then he said, but I'm eating the cigar. And I started to smile. And he looked at me and he said, so you can cook. And so I sat back and on my knee, I sat back from him. And he said, but, and he became a little stern. And he said, but, he said, you must shop, you must cook, and you must clean. And he said, and you must have no assistance. It was very firm. And then his voice softened and he said, is that all right? I smiled and I said, of course, Srila Prabhupada. And then he looked around at the men and he said, and no men are to be in the kitchen when she is there. And then he looked at Abhiram and he said, if you need assistance, your husband can do. And he left it like that.
Singara. I was listening, and most devotees will recognize as samosa, but in Bengal it's Singara.
Yeah, and it's distinguished, I think, between us against a samosa by that having a thinner or flakier crust.
Yes, that could be. Yes,
than a traditional samosa.
Bengali style.
Bengal, absolutely, that's right.
But that's amazing. Yeah, and just the way he engaged us in the service of preparing and cooking and serving him that way.
And what was required in this situation was that Prabhupada only wanted her in the kitchen cooking it.
Yeah.
Whereas previously, when he was healthier, then there were multiple devotees in there, preparing everything, etc. But he only wanted her vibe, her consciousness.
Yes.
So that's what was required at that time.
Yeah.
Now let's hear again from Tamal Krishna Goswami, who is going to tell us another situation where, in that same setting where Prabhupada was ill and what was required at that time. Let's listen to Tamal Krishna Goswami.
When we got to Rishikesh, Prabhupada was ill. And we were staying in this house, Ganga Darshan, very nice house, right overlooking the Ganga. Prabhupada had been lured there by Nava Yogendra Swami, who told him, if you drink water, I think it was he who lured, if you drink water there, you'll get back your health. So as soon as we got there, Prabhupada told me, bring Ganga Jal. And I immediately put on my gumption. I dove off the second story of the building because it was overlooking the Ganga. And I dove into the Ganga from the second floor. Prabhupada was getting his massage, and I went out with a lota and came back, swam back with the lota, brought it up, and Prabhupada, right in the middle of the, and he was not eating well at this time. It was the last months. He immediately took a full, glass of water, and a big belch came out afterwards, and Prabhupada said, accepted. And he smiled, and he was very pleased with that. I was standing there dripping wet, and he accepted. So then he immediately ordered, go out and get kachoris and jalebis. There was one shop very famous for making jalebis and kachoris in Rishikesh. And Prabhupada said, this hot jalebis is a remedy, cure for sore throat. He said, now it is a little cold, we must get hot jalebis. So we ate hot jalebis, and he said, this is, whenever you have sore throat, you eat hot jalebis. But must be made fresh hot. Then another time, Prabhupada gave me the cure for, it was a very nice cure, isn't it? Jalebis, if they're made nicely, are so tasty, and that's how you get better. Another cure he gave me was when you have dysentery. Hot puris and salt. The puris must be cooked in ghee. They must be right off the fire with salt. And sure enough, I had this dysentery. I took hot puris and salt, immediately cured, like a cork.
Yes, required for health. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not just for quantity filling up the belly, but medicinal purposes and making sure the body is working and functioning properly. So everyone take note of those cures for those particular diseases, especially when you go to India.
It's not always available. Good hot jalebis, not here.
Or cooking puris with salt. Maybe not.
Yeah.
But that is the panacea for that.
Yeah.
All right, last one we're going to hear from Sarvamangala Dasi, who reflects not just on the notion of quantity that Srila Prabhupada ate at any one time, but more importantly as to what she observed of him as to what is required when honoring prashadam. So let's focus on, I think, consciousness in this regard. I don't want to give it away, but let's look for that instruction.
Okay.
Well, Prabhupada was so humorous, which was wonderful, but also his sobriety. When he used to sit down to have his meal, I only served him his breakfast, but he sat down so simply at this little chowki in his bedroom, right against the wall, and just so sober and so honoring, just really demonstrating how you honor prashadam, and not talking to anybody, and just, taking a little of this, taking a little of that. It was like so meditative, and it was only that one time I think he called me. It was so beautiful to see. I always think Prabhupada was like poetry in motion. Everything he did was just like in the spiritual world, every step's a dance. The way he moved, and he was always demonstrating complete presence to Krishna. Whatever he was doing, everything he did was beautiful, as if it was an act of love.
Yes, this relationship Srila Prabhupada had with prashadam. Not, I think this quality of a devotee in their relationship with eating is demonstrated in so many, like what we've seen today, so many different dimensions and aspects of it, from the preparation and the quantity and the circumstances and the health, and here the spiritual relationship.
Yeah, and the notion that he was quiet and meditative, where sometimes, we as devotees will eat in a prashadam hall or in a temple room with a bunch of devotees around us, and we end up talking, I don't know, maybe not just prashadam, but some other things where it takes us away from meditating on honoring the prashadam.
Yeah. Not the power lunch concept,
Yeah, eat and run. No.
Eat and run. Yeah.
That's not
on the
method.
go.
Right. So anyway, that's the lessons and stories we have for this Ekadashi.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Next Ekadashi, we're going to have quality number 18, which is a Vaishnava, a perfect gentleman, is not influenced by the Lord's illusory energy. So some stories to look forward to.
Good, good. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Hare Krishna.